I'm Jennifer Byrne and welcome to this special on graphic novels, or comics if you'd prefer, or picture books, illustrated fiction, sequential art narrative if you want to be very fancy. Whatever label you attach, you know it when you see it. That vibrant combination of words and images which in recent years have told stories ranging from the Nazi Holocaust, in the case of the Pulitzer Prize winning Maus, to the hunt for Jack the Ripper from hell, to a version of The Great Gatsby in which the title character appears as a handsome seahorse and his lover Daisy a dandelion. These last two coming from the pens of panellists here tonight, so let's meet our four guests. First up, writer and illustrator Nikki Greenberg, who started publishing books when she was 15 years old, though has since, as she says, devoted most of her ink to comics, including 6 years on The Great Gatsby and more recently on a graphic novel interpretation of Hamlet to be published this year. Bruce Mutard has been publishing and producing graphic stories for over 15 years. His first novel was published in the US and last year saw the publication of an historical novel set in Melbourne on the eve of World War II. Eddie Campbell is famous in his field as an artist, a writer, innovator and collaborator with Alan Moore on their epic Ripper Study from Hell, through to his often painfully intimate autobiographical works The Fate of the Artist and Alec. And finally, Sophie Cunningham. She's a novelist, a publisher and the editor of literary journal Meanjin. Not an expert when it comes to graphic novels, she tells me, but very much an admirer of the form. Won't you please welcome them all? Now, Sophie, I'd like to start with you because it does intrigue me that you, editing one of the oldest literary journals in Australia, should be exposing your readers to this quite very progressive form. What made you want to try it and what kind of reaction did you have?
Well, I suppose Meanjin's always wanted to introduce new voices to the public. I mean, that's turned 70 this year, in fact. So it was part of that ongoing agenda, but also Kate Fielding and Mandy Orr, the people that I have published, they had written a non-fiction, a sort of a historical documentary piece on Indigenous contact in Port Campbell, which they'd been trying to get published for some time, and I'd been mentoring Kate as a kind of editor and thought it was just so remarkable and no one knew what to do with it. And so I was just really aware that some fantastic work was sort of languishing, and so one of the first calls I made was actually to Kate and said, I've just got this job and would you allow me to serialise Hooks, it's a very long title, the Hooks Take Hold Deep in Our Flesh.
And what was the reaction of your audience, your readership?
Well, I think the readership liked it, but there were some issues. The reviewers often picked up and were sort of a bit irritated by it in ways that I never really understood. I mean, I had nothing but admiration for the book. I think the word superficial was used at some point, and that is actually something that I've been aware of. People seem to think that it's easier to represent things visually than by using words, which is, I think rubbish, frankly.
Rubbish. Eddie, Bruce, I mean, you've been up against these battles, and Nikki, for years and years. Are you sick of being told this is a childish, superficial medium?
Yes.
I mean, this is part of... Sophie isn't the only one. There is talk of, finally a focus on graphic novels at a serious form. Is it true, or is
this is what I hear. I hear that, we've finally been accepted by the culture at large, but at the same time, we still get... If this was true, I would be invited here. I'd be invited on shows for being an interesting personality, but we still get invited everywhere as a gang,
The gang of?
We'll do something different this week. Get me a gang of graphic novelists. It's not actually a gang. The collective noun for graphic novelists is a whinge. A whinge of graphic novelists.
Is that true, Bruce? Are you a bunch of whingers?
I think graphic novels is a contentious term within our community, and many others we do duke it out over that.
But whether you should call it comics or not. Reclaim the authority of the comic.
Well, actually, the comics has all the pejorative associations of that childishness and throwaway literature that you mentioned before. And the aim of the graphic novelists or someone like myself, Eddie, Nikki and many others who are, and indeed everyone who's producing the books you can see on this table here, are to get away from that mentality, because no one is producing that sort of material.
Well, let me interrupt you and say this is not actually the outsider making fun at your childish games. This is from Chris Ware's Jimmy Corrigan, which was one of the really breakthrough graphic novel books, which won the 2001 first book prize from the Guardian. And he says, I mean, he's a very, very funny man. He talks about the unfortunate cultural situation where this potentially effective language is associated with such juvenilia as lawn games, pony races and gaily costumed muscle men. So this is one of your own people. You know the critic.
Yeah.
Chris Ware.
Well, he's the biggest whinger of the lot.
Yeah.
He is. He's famous. He's more famous for being a whinger than for being a graphic novelist.
Go on, let's start off with a whinge.
I'm going to break from the whinge brigade, actually. I think that I have a distinctly unwhingy attitude to the form, despite the whinge-worthy attributes of it never making you a living and so on. But I take great heart from something like Marjane Satrapi's book Persepolis, which was then made into an animated film. And there's a copy of it on the table here. This is the extraordinary story of her growing up and coming of age in Iran, and presents the very tough political and historical background, but through the experiences of a little girl and a teenager. And I see how that has reached an audience of people who wouldn't have even known what the term graphic novel was and don't care and what the term means, and rightly so. And they've delved into this world and discovered things in a way that watching a documentary would never give them. And I take enormous heart from that, and I think, well, that is an instance of wonderful work rising and reaching a greater audience.
I think it's actually been a steady progression of the form in its evolution. It is a relatively new medium if you don't take some historians' idea that roping in Italian narrative frescoes and the Bayeux tapestry and Aztec wall inscriptions as being graphic stories. I mean, if you exclude that, it's just been a steady progression over the latter half of the 20th century in particular, and we're just really seeing a general maturing of the form.
I mean, you're the acknowledged historian in the field in the whinge field,
Acknowledged by myself.
Acknowledged by me. I mean, do you take it as far back as the Bayeux Tapestry and the Lascaux Caves?
No. The comic strip itself really begins with the newspapers around the time, around 1900. 1896 is usually given as the first date. And they have a very interesting, complete history. But this history didn't start to be written until the 1960s. Obviously, it existed before that in the heads of collectors and antiquarians and sociologists and
practitioners.
Scholars and practitioners themselves, although they don't tend to often have a very deep historical picture of what they're doing, which is another argument again. How much do you need to know to be good at what you're doing? But these histories started to be written, and obviously they were critical histories, discussing the subject as though it were art, discussing the makers of comic strips as in terms of artists and their work. So it was natural that certain artists at the time would start to develop the idea that there was no reason why the significant stories of our time could not be told using the simple elements of the comic strip.
Let's look at how they are made, because I think it's a very interesting thing. And I just thought we'd take as an example this book. This is Watchmen, an omnibus Watchmen, done by Alan Moore, working with another. And this is just as an example. This is the first page, first panel. Here at the very back is Alan Moore's direction to his illustrator on that first panel. Yeah. Incredible amount of information, instruction, the exact size of the little smiley badge, the amount of blood in the gutter, how much iron of the roadway should be shown. Is this how it works? You worked with Alan
No,
Moore.
he's unique. Well, as a writer writing for the medium of comic books, when Alan Moore describes a picture, he doesn't just say it's raining. He will say something like, the rain beats out in staccato Morse code the text of a dreary Russian novel.
And you have to interpret that.
But he creates the picture in your head, you see.
So when he was working with you in From Hell,
Yeah.
that's what he did? Did he give you these notes, these pages?
Oh, yes.
And that's normal?
No, that's Alan Moore.
Okay.
Everybody else says it's raining.
Even though I did publish an essay in Meanjin by a woman, Liz Argyle, who writes for and works with illustrators, and she did give very extensive directions. I wondered what it would be like to be an illustrator on the receiving end, I have to say.
Well, the thing is,
not always fun, I wouldn't think.
Alan Moore is also an artist. Alan Moore
Yes.
draws.
And you also, you draw and write.
Yes, but many writers come into this who will describe a picture in which 10 things are happening and cannot possibly all be happening at once. That piece of text there is describing a picture.
Yeah.
So he sees the picture in his head and he describes what's in it. But
When you're working on your own...
But many writers don't really get that, and so they just get in the way. Their scripts are too cumbersome.
What about you two? I mean, you basically write and draw yourselves. Is that also common within the gang?
Well, each writer, author such as Nikki and myself who write and draw, we all have our idiosyncratic methods of approach. I myself primarily don't write much in the way of description at all. I just defer that labour, if you like, until I start to illustrate, because I figure thinking in
Which
pictures...
comes first?
For me, the words. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone who's working in the form. They can go the other way, and I have done stories where I have written it in pictures and put the words in later as an experiment, because you can do both.
So with Sacrifice,
No, that was definitely research and the script first. It took me a year to write before I even got to drawing on that.
And how long did it take you to draw?
Oh, about another 2 years. Yeah.
Which is a long time, but not as long as 6 or 7 years
6
for
years
Gatsby.
on Gatsby, that's right.
You didn't need to write that.
No.
Scott Fitzgerald had.
He had, and you asked about the collaboration with difficult writers. That's why I work with dead people. They can't complain, though their estates can.
And did, I believe, to start with.
That's
Yes,
another story.
alrighty.
I also write and draw my own stories, but obviously I've spent most time on adaptation and adapting a work like The Great Gatsby, which is already, the novel is in itself a perfect piece of writing. It doesn't need pictures, it's all there for you. So adapting something like that and having to handle it with such care was actually far more difficult than if I were to write my own story, wanting to do justice to Fitzgerald's prose, but also wanting to illuminate it in an interesting way, in a different way, while not bruising it. Was a big task.
Is it a good or bad legacy for the contemporary graphic novel, the old Kapow comic?
Well, in the essay on graphic novels that I published in Meanjin in March in 2009, Nikki, you were quoted by the author, George Dunford, as saying that you thought it was problematic, weren't you? Or did I misread that quote?
Well, I don't feel like there's a straight lineage. I certainly don't feel like what I do came from, a progression through from superhero comics through to what I'm doing. I never read those comics as part of my background, and so I don't feel a connection with it. It's not a matter of I differentiate myself from this trash or anything like that. It's I just don't feel any connection with it, and it's certainly not with the world of the specialist comic shop, which involves shrink-wrapped covers and
and very masculine.
Teenage boys sort of feeling the shrink wrap.
Please don't go there.
Well, one of the essential differences is that particular market is made up of huge corporations who own characters who've become like franchises for Hollywood. So so you get X-Men or Wolverine, Hugh Jackman's latest movie, but those things don't really have an author. When I buy a book, I'm like Art Spiegelman's book about the Twin Towers.
Here we are.
I'm
A beautiful, beautiful book.
Yeah. An author is telling me about his personal experience, which you're not going to get in one of these corporate-owned franchise characters.
Yet,
which is what the kids want, fine. I wouldn't want to spoil anybody's fun.
Yeah,
It doesn't interest me.
Yet when I went into one of these major bookshops and there was a category designated graphic novel and there was a category designated comic. And I said, how do you decide which goes into which category? And do you know what they said to me? Those ones are DC Marvel, those ones are the rest. So that's how they define it. Look, I mean, here are some of them, but there are many more. But just to take an example, here's, Bruce's The Sacrifice, which is about basically a pacifist-minded person in World War II. We've got Joe Sacco, his amazing, amazing book on Palestine.
That's one of the great... he did another one about Bosnia called Safe Area Gorazde. Joe's unique. He's a cartoonist journalist. Look how thick that is. He goes there and he lives. And I think there's something about being able to get in among people and get to the heart of things, because he's not carrying a camera. He talks to people and he goes back to his room and he sketches and writes it all down while it's fresh in his memory.
But this, I mean, like Persepolis did,
and makes it a book like this. I think these are among the masterpieces of the form.
And like Persepolis, which takes you inside this world of Iran in which no one knows. I mean, frankly, all jokes aside, does it sometimes frustrate the hell out of you that basically, even when they did give the Pulitzer Prize to Maus, it was a special Pulitzer Prize. It wasn't the main Pulitzer Prize. That it basically is a form that still struggles for legitimacy. How legitimate?
Well, it's gaining legitimacy with every currency. I mean, it's not just winning prizes, it's gaining an audience, a wide audience, because you mentioned about who we imagine the audience to be. For me, it's anyone and everyone. It's just all the entire adult readership of the world is my audience, and they can take my work as they live it. But it goes further than that. It's about gaining ground and acceptance in other areas of the arts community and literature in general, like the grants bodies, academia.
Well, you're working with school authorities now, educational authorities, as a way of getting graphic novel forms into schools.
Yes, again, the medium is just one of many of the 9 or so that are available to communicate with, and its education has been resistant to utilising the comic medium because of its pejorative connotations, but they're embracing it now. They're starting to send out feelers. Can we teach history or English or some other subject utilising the graphic narrative medium? And they're starting to toy with that. So that's a gaining ground. That is mainstream. That's how I see it. It's infiltrating into all the areas where all the other mediums already been and just becoming normalised.
Actually, just going to briefly refer to what Bruce was saying about funding bodies. It is a problem, it certainly was a problem for some of the writers and artists I've worked with, that they keep being sort of bounced around in this bureaucratic nightmare of, go to the Visual Arts Board. No, go to the Literature Board. And no one really... Community arts, does that still exist? Like, no one really knows how to define it. And obviously, an art form can't just survive on funding bodies alone, but their confusion about the form captures some of that general kind of cultural confusion.
Do you see a time when it will be, because this is the age of the visual, and that's the big difference from the other so-called renaissances that have happened. The world has actually changed. The screen has become a completely normal way to access information. Will this one last? will this wave of interest, which does manifest whether it's through Hollywood destroying your work or basically groovers like Ian Rankin wandering into the field, whichever form it takes, will it last?
It's a funny situation with Hollywood where they have to dumb down a comic to make it acceptable. Like they did with From Hell.
Yes, you didn't like the From Hell.
I don't think
No, it's
anything
all
lasts. I think things always have phases of
all right.
periods of being embraced, and then people, I think it'll come and go like most cultural forms. I don't think it'll disappear though, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, we're still up and coming. We're still going too far, Evans. We're not ready to go yet.
I'm talking about you going on, not going.
Oh, no. But that's the implication, though. That
Bruce still has to work off his next advance. So he hopes it's not finishing anytime soon.
yeah, the trilogy's got to take me another 6 years. It's got to last at least 10.
A final thing, in the introduction to the Joe Sacco Palestine, Edward Said, the late Edward Said, writes something I thought which was really intriguing, where he says that comics, and he uses comics for graphic novel, for whatever, are a different way of actually changes the way you can take in information. It's not A plus B plus C plus D, which is the narrative form of the prose novel. It actually, the form he said, comics freed me to think and imagine and to see differently.
I think that the throwaway line that you sometimes hear, which I really disagree with, is that it's like watching a movie, but it's on the page. Now, a storyboard is like watching a movie frame after frame, but when you see a beautifully constructed page in a graphic novel, you're looking at the page as a whole as well, all at the same moment, the composition of that page. So you're not only moving through the frames in a sequential manner, but you're taking in a whole composition which is telling you something and giving you information. And I think that's something unique and very special to this form. It's not like being in the single moment of a film. You're in numerous moments at once, and you've got such scope to play with that as an artist, and so much to gain from that as a reader. So I think it's marvellous. It's just a marvellous form.
I agree. The whole book arrives simultaneously. You've picked it up. You accidentally saw the end pages. Now, in a prose novel, that wouldn't matter because it was going too fast. You couldn't read them. But you've already got a sense of where it's going and what it's about. And a page is simultaneous. You can't read the top without half noticing what's at the bottom.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love in Art Spiegelman's The Shadow of No Towers, the way he draws the towers. He said that the second before they pancaked and collapsed, you couldn't see it with your eye, but they shone. The skeleton shone of this building, and he's reproduced it here.
Well, that's one of the very attractions of the form. Sometimes a thing can only be captured in a drawing. It can't be seen by the camera, or how would you describe that even?
And what's more, he's actually warping space and time, which is something I think quite unique to this form. Just in the fact of doing a composition where you're looking at different moments in time at the same time on the page, you're playing with the reader's sense of space and time. I'm doing this a lot in Hamlet, where you have characters tumbling down the page as the story is progressing along in the usual way of reading. So absolutely, I think it's fabulous to play with this sort of thing.
Very often, if you look at a little picture in the book, and it's a simple little diagram, but there's something about reading 350 pages of the interrelationships of these little diagrams, where you feel that you have been taken into and been invited to share an actual experience.
And I have to say, it's, as I said, for the girl who was not allowed to read comics, it's been a great adventure. I thank you very much for taking us into your world. That's our program for tonight. A big thank you to our guests, to Sophie Cunningham, Eddie Campbell, Bruce Mutard and Nikki Greenberg. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into the graphic novel world. Join us again on the first Tuesday of next month for Book Club. Until then, very happy reading and good night.